You know, having someone with your military experience listening in, I gotta say, I'm pretty excited to be diving into this with you. We're tackling Carl von Clausewitz today, his big book on war.
A classic.
It really is. It's one of those you almost have to read, even now. And we're starting right at the beginning, chapter 1, where Clausewitz lays out his whole idea of what war actually is. It gets dense. But seriously, there's stuff in here people are still arguing about, even in this century.
It's amazing, isn't it, how a book from the 1800s can still be so relevant.
Totally. So, to kick us off, what does Clausewitz say? What's his big opening argument about the nature of war?
Well, he jumps right in. He calls war a duel, a contest of strength.
A duel? Isn't that oversimplifying things a bit?
Maybe at first glance.
Hmm.
But he's getting at something deeper here. He's not just talking about armies, lining up and fighting. It's about a clash of wills, a struggle to dominate, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, too. He knew, even back then, that war wasn't just about who had the bigger guns.
Okay, so he's factoring in the psychological side of things. But Clausewitz was writing when muskets and cannons were high-tech, right? How does that translate to modern warfare, drones, cyber attacks, all that?
And that's what's so brilliant about Clausewitz. He was looking for those underlying principles, the things that stay true about war, no matter the technology. Weapons change, yeah, sometimes massively, but the core of conflict, that clash of wills he talks about, that's human. That's timeless.
So even with all our advancements, it still boils down to breaking the enemy's will to fight.
Essentially, yes. But he gets even more specific. He separates the preparation for war from the actual conduct of war, and this chapter is all about the conduct part.
Hold on, what's the distinction there? Preparation versus conduct.
Think of it like this. Preparation is everything before the fighting starts. Building your army, making weapons, planning, training, getting ready for war. Conduct is once those plans are in motion, armies meet, stuff goes down. That's the conduct of war.
So we're in the thick of it with this chapter then. The real action.
Exactly. And that's where his ideas about tactics and strategy come in. We hear those words all the time, but Clausewitz gives them a very particular meaning.
Right, because it's not just fighting, it's knowing how to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So tactics are what? Like the techniques you use.
It's how you use your forces in battle. Winning those individual fights, making the right calls on the ground, using what you've got effectively.
So on the battlefield, that's your formations, when to attack, when to hold back, how to win that specific fight, right?
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting, and I bet with your experience, you know this better than most, being good at tactics. It doesn't automatically mean you'll win the whole war.
Oh, absolutely. Won a battle doesn't mean you've won the war itself.
Need that bigger plan.
And that's strategy. That's how you use each little battle, those tactical wins, to reach your overall goal, win the whole thing. Knowing where to fight, when, and importantly, when not to fight, it's all got to be working towards that bigger victory.
Okay, so it's like tactics are the individual moves. Strategy is how you're using those moves to win the whole game. Perfect analogy. Like chess. You can be amazing at moving each piece, but if you don't get the strategy, you lose to someone who can think several moves ahead.
Makes sense. But Clausewitz, he also talks about something else, and it doesn't seem as exciting at first. The stuff that happens off the battlefield.
Ah, you're talking about what he calls support of the forces, all that marching, setting up camps, the logistics side of things.
Yeah, and I'll admit, at first I thought, really, how important can marching around be? But then I started thinking,
What'd you realize?
that bad march, that could wreck everything. Troops are tired, vulnerable, caught out of position. It's not just walking around.
Clausewitz gets that. Where you march, when you march, how you march, it all matters. Those aren't just logistical things, they're strategic choices in disguise. They affect what battles you can even fight, how fast you can respond.
It's about keeping your army in fighting shape even before they see the enemy.
Exactly. And that all feeds into this idea of supporting your forces. Food, supplies, keeping their equipment working. It's not glamorous, but it's crucial. It all ties together, doesn't it? And it's not just the beans and bullets. Clausewitz is big on something else, the mental side of war. Morale, leadership, how much the people back home believe in what you're doing, all that factors in.
Makes sense, especially back then. Those battles were brutal, up close and personal. I bet the psychological impact was huge.
Imagine being in those lines, your buddies next to you, the enemy right there. The noise, the chaos. We can barely imagine it now.
And keeping your troops going through that, their morale had to be everything. But what about modern war? We got so much tech now, it's not like that anymore, is it?
That's the debate, right? Some say, yeah, modern weapons, they put a distance between fighters, drone pilots not facing the same thing as a soldier in a trench.
But then again,
But then again, that distance, it creates its own pressures. Moral dilemmas. What if you hit the wrong target, knowing any minute you could cause civilian casualties? That weighs on you.
it's not just the soldier on the ground feeling that, is it?
Exactly. Look at civilians now. Terrorism, propaganda, feeling like you're being watched all the time. That's the mental side of war in the 21st century.
So Clausewitz, he might not have pictured how we fight now, but that focus on the mental game, still spot on.
Totally. War is as much in your head as it is on some battlefield. That's why people still read him. He gives you a way to think about war, break down those complex situations, figure out why people do what they do in a conflict.
So we've got logistics mattering, the mental side of things,
Mm.
these principles he laid out. But how do we use this stuff today? What does it mean to think like Clausewitz now?
$1 million question, right? There's no
Yeah.
easy answer. But the big takeaway, he makes you look past the obvious, not just the current battle, but the whole picture. And never forget, no matter how fancy the weapons get, it's still humans fighting, with all our flaws and everything.
So even with AI, with drones, understanding people, that's still key.
100%. Tech changes how we fight, but not why we fight. That's human nature.
That's a powerful thought. But I gotta be honest, when it comes to something like cyber warfare, I'm not seeing how this translates. It's so different from what he knew.
It's a good point. Cyber, it's like a whole new type of war. But even there, I see Clausewitz.
Really? How so? I'm just not seeing it.
Think back to how he defined tactics. Using your force in combat. And strategy. Using those combats to reach your overall goal.
Yeah, okay. But what even is combat in cyber? It's not tanks and trenches.
Exactly. That's where the lines get blurry. In cyber, a combat might be hacking a system, spreading fake news to cause chaos, messing with supply chains. The battlefield's digital, but those tactics, that strategy, still apply. You're still choosing how to use what you've got, how to outsmart the other guy, how to win.
So like, a successful hack, that's a tactical win. But if it doesn't help you win the whole thing, it's meaningless.
You got it. And on the other hand, the right cyber attacks. They could wreck an enemy's ability to even fight a normal war. You could win without firing a shot. That's what's so crazy about cyber. It changes everything.
It's wild how these ideas from so long ago still apply.
That's Clausewitz. He got to the core of it, but there's something else in modern war he makes us think about.
What's that?
When is it war and when is it peace? He knew war had a beginning, a middle, an end. Nowadays, not so clear. Terrorism, cyber, all this info ops stuff, it's not that simple anymore.
It's like we're always kind of at war, even when it's not a full-blown thing with armies and all that.
It's a whole different game now.
Yeah.
And that makes you rethink how Clausewitz fits in. Like, if you can't tell what's a civilian target and what's a military one, which happens a lot with cyber and terrorism, how do you even plan? How do you know if you've won when it never really seems to end? Clausewitz couldn't have pictured this stuff.
Makes you wonder, are his ideas even that useful anymore with everything so different?
See, that's where Clausewitz surprises you. He didn't write some rule book. It's more like he gives you the thinking behind it all. He gives you ways to look at this mess, figure out what the other side wants, and make decisions when everything's uncertain. That never gets old.
So war changes, but needing a strategy, understanding how tactics fit into that, remembering there's a human side to it, that's what matters.
Exactly. And honestly, everyone should read this stuff, not just military folks. It makes you think about the world differently, question what you hear, and have smarter conversations about this whole war and peace thing.
I gotta say, this has been eye-opening. Never thought Clausewitz would be so relevant to today.
He's got something for everyone, right?
He really does. And on that note, huge thanks to you listening in for joining us on this deep dive. Hope you've gotten a new take on Clausewitz and how much he still matters in the 21st century.
It's been great digging into this with you. And remember, this one was for you specifically. Hope it's useful as you navigate your own career and this whole crazy world, really. Until next time.